Thank you everybody for joining us. I'm Julia here from Inspire Advantage. Really happy that you could all join us for this free MCAT workshop. The chemistry and physics sections we'll be going over some practice questions alongside insights from our two panelists. Before we get started, just want to touch on what we'll be talking about today. The first slide, we'll be talking about how to tackle each MCAT questions and your strategy for doing that. And then we'll go into optimizing your MCAT study strategy. Then we'll have our question section where the panelists will pick out practice questions from the MCAT and kind of break them down for you. And then at the end, we'll have a Q&A section. So if you have any questions throughout the webinar, I'd ask that you hang on to them and type them in the chat box. That way we don't get off track with questions and we're there at that designated time to answer those questions, and the panelists will answer those questions for you. Just another side note, this webinar is going to be recorded, and if you are an attendee of this webinar, it'll be sent out to you tomorrow. So if you want to go back or use this as a resource, feel free to do so. Okay, just a little bit about Inspire. If you're not familiar with us, we're an admissions consulting company that's dedicated to helping you get into your dream medical school. Our experts have helped applicants like you get into top medical schools across the country, into residency programs, dental schools, and more. We have over 15 years of experience doing this stuff, so we're experts. We have a 94% acceptance rate. We've had our the students that we work with get $23 million in scholarship awards, and you're 4 times more likely to get accepted when you work with us. Okay, with that said, I'll use this as an opportunity to introduce your tutors. We have Benji and Lois here. Benji, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, and Lois, you can follow afterwards.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Great. My name is Benji. I'm a medical student. I'm a 3rd year at UT Southwestern. Grew up in Plano, Texas, went to UT Austin. I help out as an admissions counselor, meaning if you're applying to medical school or if you need help with just part of essays, I'm here for you, as well as any help with MCAT. So let me know at the end if you have any particular questions about Texas.
Hi, everybody. I'm also from Texas. I also went to UT Austin for undergrad. I currently go to Harvard Med for for medical school. I'm a 4th year in a research year, so I have 1 more year actually, taking the 5th year. And I'm an admissions counselor, so if you have any questions about applying, about writing essays, interview prep, things like that, I'm your girl.
Awesome. Look at this webinar connecting everybody. I love that. All righty, let's go ahead and get started.
Sweet. So Lois and I are going to go back and forth here. I'm going to lay down some foundations for tackling the MCAT chemistry and physics questions. Frankly, a lot of it will be repetitive because there's some really base foundational concepts that once you understand, you just need to hit the details on. So one of the things that applies not just in chem and physics, but in biology, and it's going to apply when you get to medical school as well, is you can't rely on just formulas and memorization anymore. That's going to get you some questions, and it certainly is important, but you have to be able to look at a problem and break down everything from the question to the answer choices. You need to actually be able to logic in your head and reason. You can't rely like in high school or college anymore on just snap immediate word association. That'll work for some, but not all. You have to be able to convince yourself why your answer is correct and others are incorrect. So to do that, I know it sounds overwhelming, but you'll start by just breaking down your question into manageable parts. First, know what they're asking. Sometimes you'll have multiple sentences and then your question. Make sure you know what they're actually looking for. Go back and get key details from the passage. You're going to encounter a lot of fluff, and part of your practice and training is going to be developing an eye for how to ignore the fluff and hone in on key details. There's always going to be distractors in your questions, and you have to start getting a sense for when they are giving you the answer that looks like it's just right, but is something off. You have to be able to convince yourself why that's not the right answer. So again, no regurgitation anymore. That's only going to get you 20, 30% of this, but we want you to get 100. So we're going to start developing these kind of techniques in practice in the following slides as well.
Awesome. I'm going to just reiterate a little bit of what Benjamin said. Mostly when you are trying to simplify the questions that you're reading, it does take some repetition to efficiently identify what is being asked of you, but you want to look at what they're giving you. So the data that they're giving you, and then think back to any principles that you've learned when you were reviewing or preparing for the MCAT in that particular section. Whenever you simplify it and then boil it down to these are the key things that they're asking, sort of remove the fluff, it then makes it much easier to feel solid about the answer that you've selected.
Like I mentioned earlier, going into the passage, knowing what you're looking for can be really helpful. So when you start to develop a sense of your timing and pacing, you'll actually be able to look ahead and know what kind of questions you need to find the answers for. That way you can tell which parts of the sentences, which things are just extraneous, and which you're going to need to remember when you go back to those questions. Additionally, that process of elimination is super helpful. Sometimes you'll get to a question and all 5 of the answer choices seem correct. You're going to want to go through each one then and say why this can't be true, why that can't be true, whether it's just something that's fundamentally contradictory to what you understand, or you cannot make the logical connection to how that would be the right answer. Just because something sounds like the correct word association, don't let it trip you up. They're going to do that on purpose. They know the terms and the words that go along with certain questions, and they don't want you just to rely on that memory heuristic. They want you to actually be able to explain why a given answer is correct.
Awesome. The next thing that you want to do is pace yourself. So this is also going to take some repetition and some work, but you want to allot some time to certain questions and monitor your progress as you go through without feeling like you're rushing. And what that means is that some questions are going to require more time, while others you might be able to find the answer very quickly. And it's not as if you're going to spend the same amount of time on each question, but you might find that you go through a couple of them very quickly and can use that leftover time to tackle some of the more complex ones. But the key thing is to know when to move on. If you've been spending too long on a particular question, maybe a couple of minutes more than you've banked for, just move on. There's 2 things to think about. One is that guessing in itself is helpful because you have some percentage chance of being correct. But if you move on, you can then use leftover time that you have at the end to go back and tackle the questions that were stumping you. And sometimes when you've taken that time to think through other questions, the answer to that question from like much earlier on might actually come a little bit faster since you've had some time to go through the test, you've gotten more comfortable, and you may or may not have been thinking about that particular question in the back of your mind.
Yeah, there's absolutely some truth to what Lois is saying, that some questions need to percolate a little bit. Just like anything in regular life, when you can't find your keys, sometimes it needs to just process unconsciously and you'll go back and have it down. So some common things to avoid, I've already touched on this first one, but really, if you're only relying on memorization, you're going to get all those buzzwords that are tricks incorrect, because you're going to have memorized the right words and that's fine. But if you can't explain why you're choosing an answer, you're going to get those wrong. Another big thing with that first point, and I really think that the MCAT is where I started to understand this as a study strategy. It's really nice to read back over notes and to read over text and to go back and highlight. It feels really good for us and we feel like we're learning really well, but it's not the most effective use of your time. Doing practice questions, getting them wrong, doing flashcards and being wrong all day for the first couple of weeks is the right way to do it. I know that it sucks. I know that it hurts, but that is going to make you a way better test taker, and it's going to actually teach you the information. We fall into this trap that because we're highlighting and we're going over material that we already understand, we feel very smart and we feel very good. And that's a nice feeling. But the right thing to do to feel good after the test is going to be to feel bad while you're training. It's just like working out or training for an instrument. You have to mess up. You have to allow yourself to fail at the start while you're learning. So make sure you're learning the actual concepts and testing yourself on them. There's a lot of details that if you can learn how to do quickly will help you. So to that second point of any questions that have dimensional analysis, whether it's stoichiometry or other, don't just skip over them or think that it looks like you can eyeball it. Just take the extra 15 seconds and answer. Like Lois said in the previous slide, if it's really tripping you up or getting you stuck, don't waste all your time filling out a whiteboard of these equations. If you know it, work through it. If you don't, give it a little time and move on. And that third point is really just highlighting again that first point I made, that you have to do practice questions. You've got to get them wrong. It's got to suck. And that's how you're going to get better at taking tests.
Awesome. Let's talk about optimizing your study strategy. One thing is to set specific high yield goals. The first thing that I see people trying to do that I think can be can trip people up or can delay their progress is that they just really want to get everything down. But sometimes, especially when you have limited time, you want to look at what the high yield content is. So what percentage of the time is the MCAT going to cover this content? And there are certain topics that get covered 100% of the time. So you want to make sure that you truly understand those topics front and back. And some examples are like electrostatics and then acid-base chemistry. You then want to take your high yield goals and then break it into a study plan that's actually manageable and within time constraints. So something that I learned is that there's a difference between what I wish I could do and what I best case scenario, I wish I was studying 8 hours a day, very efficient all the time. But realistically, I think I'm more productive in the early morning and in the late night. So I essentially will then organize my schedule such that I have my high yield topics in those times, and then give myself some grace in the downtime, or even take a break in that time downtime. But the goal here is that I put those study goals within a manageable and realistic time frame, and then I put time constraints on them so that I'm not spending all day just on one topic, but that if it's 8 a.m. and it's been maybe 11 a.m. now, I need to move on. That way you still cover more things. The next thing is to use active learning techniques. You want to be solving problems and going through question banks regularly, because it helps you attach yourself to the concepts you've learned previously and then apply them, as opposed to just passively taking in information. You want to be actively learning, and the best way to do that is by solving problems and thinking through problems. Also, you can teach the concepts that you've learned to other people to solidify your understanding. It's actually sometimes when I'm trying to explain a concept to somebody else that I realize that, oh, I actually don't think I remember this very well. And so it's in that space and in that time that you can then look things up and clarify things so that you can then teach them better.
So, of course, the chemistry and physics section is just one part of several in the MCAT. You can't spend all of your time on it. You're going to have to figure out how to best integrate it into your schedule. And I think Lois started bringing up a really good point, is figuring out times of the day that work well for you for certain activities. For example, for myself, I know that I answer questions best earlier in the day, but I can read all day. So it's a better use of my time to do my practice problems, perhaps a review from the previous day, first thing in the morning, and then I can spend the rest of the afternoon and evening doing content review, reading, going over notes, etc. Maybe you guys are opposite. Maybe late night is when your questions turn on. Maybe you like to read first thing in the day. That is totally fine. You just have to experiment a little bit with it. And that's exactly the point of this, is take the week to experiment, figure out the strategy that works best for you, figure out the rotation. Is it that you need one day where you review content of all 4 sections, and then the next day you do questions of all 4 sections? Do you do, half the day of content review for just 1 or 2 topics like chem, phys, and cars, and then the other half of the day with questions? You're going to need to find what works for you, and it's going to be different for everyone. We can offer you our personal experiences. We can offer you what has worked well for many students in the past, but fundamentally, you have to figure out what is the best strategy for you. And we're more than happy to help guide you through that.
Oh, is this my section?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, to continue this conversation, the next thing you want to do is simulate exam conditions perfectly. What I recommend for my students is that once they've selected a day that they're going to do the exam and a time, you want to try to take your full-length practice exams at that same day and that same time. So if you have organized your schedule so that you're studying Monday through Friday, but your exam is going to be on a Saturday at 8 a.m., you want to take your full-length practice exams in a quiet place, bring your lunch at 8 a.m. On a Saturday. And what that does is it allows you, part of learning and tackling the MCAT is one, going through and drilling those questions, but it's also teaching yourself how to sit down for 7 hours, and then when to take a break, and then when it is that you naturally need to go use the restroom. You figure those things out by simulating the testing environment, and it helps you build stamina for test day. The next thing to do is to analyze your mistakes. I think the best thing to do in addition to going through questions, is always to review them, right? Identify the patterns the patterns of errors that you're making so that you don't repeat those errors. And it helps you identify work areas to spend more time in to review. And then lastly, track your progress, right? Track your scores, track the amount of content and areas that you have reviewed, track the areas that you're still getting wrong despite the review. Maybe you need to change something or add another tool or get some support outside. But when you're tracking that progress, it helps you see that what you're doing is progressing. One of my favorite things to recommend for my students to do is to actually track the scores on their practice tests, because you essentially are recreating the testing environment. And if you are aiming for a certain score, you should be seeing that score get closer and closer as you're taking those practice tests each Saturday or something, or each weekend or each day that your exam is scheduled. But yeah.
Okay, I know we just went through a lot of information. Thank you, Benji and Lois, for all your insights so far. I want to take this opportunity to maybe take a breather, take a break, stretch a little bit since we've been through so much. And I want to take the opportunity to tell you about a little discount that we have for you. So as a little thank you for coming to our webinar and learning from Lois and Benji, we have a 10% off coupon for your entire program if you decide to work with Inspira. So if you scan the QR code or if you type in 10 off web, as you see there, you'll be eligible for 10% off your entire program. So be sure to scan that QR code, screenshot, take a picture, take note of that when we send the webinar out to you tomorrow, and take advantage, because why not? All right, back to our regular scheduled programming. And I think we're going to start with the questions. So Benji, go ahead.
Great. Lois, I have a couple of questions I pulled up that I think would be nice to review with everyone, but if you have any that you were prepping beforehand as well, feel free to.
You're all good. I'll let you take lead on that. Yeah.
Okay. So then can I ask that you just pull up the Inspira Advantage MCAT practice bank
Sure.
for the screen?
Mm-hmm.
No, Nadia, these three will not need the calculator.
Can you guys see my screen? Not yet. No. Okay, one moment. Share now. Okay. What numbers are you wanting to show? Okay, there it is. What numbers do you want to show? Oh, you're muted.
Thanks, appreciate it, Lois. Can you go ahead and Control F secondary structure of protein? We can just Control F secondary structure. So hopefully that's given you guys a little hint. Here, let me actually give you the question. I think that'll be easier for you.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to be question number 59.
Okay. Oh, here it is. 59. Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Okay. I'm not going to say that I'm starting off with a simple question, because for some of us, if we're at the beginning of our studying, this might be a little harder. For those who have been hitting the MCAT already, maybe this isn't your first time. Perhaps this is a slightly easier question. Regardless, I want you to look at this, and instead of just jumping at whatever your brain says, actually read it. There's a little bit of a passage beforehand, but for now, we're going to be able to just talk through question and answer analysis, and just take some time, think about it. And then, Lois, you want to have them maybe type it in the chat, or you want them just to keep it in their heads?
They can type it in the chat. Yeah, let's make it interactive.
Sure. Type it in the chat what you guys think whenever it comes to mind. But again, even if you think you have it, actually explain to yourself why the others are incorrect and why the one you believe is correct. So for anyone with any screen issues, I'll just read it out again. Which type of bond is primarily responsible for the secondary structure of proteins? I'll give you guys maybe a full minute. All right, getting a lot of answers. Pretty much it seems that everything I'm seeing is between A and B. So people are saying between disulfide bonds and hydrogens. Is anyone, can they unmute at all, or are they unable to unmute? Can we ask if any, or you can actually type it out. Anyone that's feeling brave, if you chose either A or B and you're feeling brave and want to explain what you were thinking, feel free to type it in.
Anyone feeling brave out there? Come on, guys, don't be shy.
Yeah.
Again, remember what we were saying too, that the better way to learn is to type it out, get it wrong. It's totally fine.
Yeah, I'm really liking Amelia's answer. I think they're yeah, I think I see people's answers popping in. Do you mind if I riff a little bit on here, Benjamin? Is it cool?
Yeah, go for it, Lois. Maybe just before you do, or maybe Bob already did it. Let's see. Okay, I was going to see if anybody that said A wanted to answer what they were thinking for A, but I think we're good timing wise. Lois, why don't you go ahead and riff a little bit here?
Yeah. So one of the things I like to do, right, we talked about this earlier, is just like simplifying the question. It depends on where you are in your study regimen, but I think this is a question that's like often asked in the MCAT or in this section. And I think I have like a visual that I can just like put up. Hopefully it shows. Let's see. I'll just share this tab super quickly. But I like things to be really, really simple. And someone had made the point that what is that in secondary structures, you have these beta pleated sheets and alpha helices. So when I get asked that question, what bonds are involved, I think about, okay, which number, which like primary, secondary, tertiary are we looking at? And then what's holding these things together? And simply put, it's hydrogen bonds. But what I think about when I see that question is I just think about this picture in itself and then think about which bonds are involved. Benji, if you had a better answer or a different answer, I'd love to hear it too.
Yeah, I think that's great. Another thing that I would caution you guys, if I were a non-pre-med or non-medical test taker and I were seeing this, I would probably have answered disulfide bonds. Why? Just because I see the distractor of di, right? I'm thinking secondary structure, I'm reaching for anything. So if you were just relying on some brute memorization that you know some prefixes and suffixes without actually understanding what those bonds are, you would have gotten that question incorrect at this time. So the point being that that's an example, good example of a distractor, that you can't just jump because you see di and then secondary, let's go for it. Actually be able to explain to yourself what each one does. And that's going to require a little bit of memorization, yes, but more importantly, the logic of where each of those steps comes from.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say Nadia had a great question, like what if I got the right answer but the wrong explanation? I think that's really good to identify, because sometimes if that's the case, then it plays a little bit of luck in your answer or in your score. And you want to make sure that you are reviewing the explanation for these questions, because there are questions that you could get right but wrongly explain, or get wrong but have the right idea. So explanations, I think, at the end of the day, for me, are actually the reason I prioritize reviewing and I prioritize questions, and not necessarily what answer that you got. So that's a good question. And again, always look at the explanation and make sure that your line of thinking is somewhat parallel to the answer choice.
Nadia, that's actually a great question, because the next example I want to bring up is one where you could actually, just by understanding the direct translations of the words, have a decent guess at this one. Nonetheless, I want you guys to practice the actual logic stepwise approach with process of elimination with some thought. Whether or not this is an easy or hard question for you at this time, just practice that approach. So Lois, this is going to be question 57. I don't know if it's the 57 immediately preceding this in the process. Yeah, there you go. So the question reads, In the context of the central dogma of molecular biology, which of the following process directly synthesizes RNA from a DNA template? Again, this isn't an easy or a hard question per se. It's all relative to where you are right now. If you're just starting, you might not know what central dogma is. You might not know what these 4 answer choices is. But do your very best from what you remember back in high school, your pre-med courses, to try to actually think through what each of those 4 answer choices is, what those words mean, and do your best to answer. Once again, feel free to type in the chat if you'd like to and you have an explanation, throw it in. Or you can even do the opposite, explain why you didn't choose one of the other options if you can explain it well. Just take this time to practice. We're not sending the video transcript to any medical schools or anything. And also, if you're someone who wasn't thinking B, because I see a lot of B's came in, still type it anyway. Don't worry about whatever majority is saying right now. I've seen polls that go back and forth all the time. So type what you think. I like that I'm seeing some people actually put in 2 letters. That's kind of interesting. Oh, you guys were answering C to give 58. That's cool. Overachievers, right on. I thought you were giving both of those answers for the same question. Got it. Thanks, Sean. Great. Nadia, Ryan, thanks for throwing in some thoughts. Good question. How to set. Nadia, you probably have it somewhere in your head, but honestly, you can rule out A and B. I'd love to know why, honestly, you can do that. I'm sure that you have some thoughts, but make sure that it's not just like some immediate memorization, but you can actually talk through it if your mom or dad asked, or your little brother came in the room and wanted to know. I think we've given it a little bit of time. Lois, do you want to start talking about it and I jump in, or vice versa?
Yeah, no, you can start. Yeah.
So I'll start off to give kind of a counter example of what I had mentioned in the earlier one. While you really should rely on logic and being able to do cross-elimination explain, if you are hands to the wall, going back over some of your questions, and you just have base knowledge to work off of, do try to understand at least what these words mean. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of etymology. It's the study of words and their origins, but it's really good to understand the words that you're memorizing, because once you get to medical school, there's going to be a lot of Latin. And it's good to know what those words mean rather than just brute memorization. So here, for example, think about what each of this is: replication, transcription, translation, reverse transcription. I'm going to start with transcription, which is going to be the correct answer to this one. To transcribe something. So a scribe is someone who writes. Trans means across or through. So this means traditionally transcribing, for example, from one language to another. And this is exactly the idea here, that you're transcribing from the language of DNA to RNA. Versus translation, I'm sorry, I don't know what lation means right now, but translation, as you can understand, would be the idea of something transforming or translating altogether, right? So you're going from that mRNA to protein at this point. And replication, you're just copying effectively, right? So just having an idea of what each of these means is really helpful. And reverse transcription, someone asked about it in retroviruses, retro reverse, you're getting the right idea. So still important to understand how I'm applying the definitions of each of those words. But if, hands to the wall, you have to, you can also translate it directly. Lois, any thoughts?
Yeah, I am a big image recaller. So the underlining thing is that you do need to understand what these words mean and what is happening. But if you are like, oh, what image can I form or keep in my mind? Just as I did with the first question, I just Google central dogma, and there's a beautiful cartoon-ish image. Let me see if I can pop it up here. Share this super quickly. And I just keep this in my mind somehow or some way. I can redraw it myself or write it super quickly. But this is like the picture or image that I keep in my mind when I'm trying to think about which direction things are going in and what is what. I like animations. I love drawing. So that's what really helps me, like something to anchor back to when I'm unsure about some things. But yeah. Let me go back to here.
Vibov sent a really good message. He mentioned transcription has C in it and translation has L. So C comes before L in the alphabet. These are called mnemonics. It's from the Greek god Mnemosyne. She was the goddess of memory. Again, etymology, cool to know all the history and stories of it. As many as you can. I had so many in my book. That's how I personally learned. But again, I understood each of my mnemonics, even though they were helping me with the memorization. So Vibov, great mnemonic, but make sure you also understand what transcription translation is, not just the order, because they'll find ways to trip you up.
Yeah. You want to try one more?
Yeah, we can do one more. Control F, hexokinase for now, and then I'm going to see if I can find the actual question number. Oh, yeah, there you go.
Oh, 30.
You guys will see it. Yeah, 54, right there.
That's so funny. Okay.
Close by. You guys will see a trend. This one also is going to have a little bit to do with language and understanding enzyme names and terms. Once again, keep practicing the strategy we talked about. So give it a second. Amelia, Amima, wonderful. Now that you've answered that already, go back through everybody that's typing in and understand why B through D are wrong. The next level of learning is to not just be able to say kinase adds a phosphate group, which is great, Amima, but now be able to tell me for the 3 wrong answers, what would you call that type of enzyme, for example, that does something else, something that removes a phosphate group, or something maybe that connects two compounds together. What do you call that? Once you have that, that's really knowledge, right? That's understanding it. So everyone answering, great job. Maybe see now if you can explain why the others are wrong, or say what the enzyme would be for those ones to be correct. Seeing some good conversation in the chat. Looks like the majority is kind of leaning on A. Lois, I'm going to give my just etymology based, if you had to give an answer, what you would say, and then we can also talk about how you would actually understand this. Somebody mentioned earlier kinase, right? So anytime ACE tends to refer to enzymatic activity, and then you think about what other parts of the word there are. KIN, kine, comes from kinetics or movement action. In this case, kinase is an enzyme that does some action. In particular, this action is adding that phosphate group. Hexo, if you remember this one's a Latin prefix for how many sides and all that, you can understand based on the shape of glucose, who this is adding to, where it's adding. And that's all great. This is, again, the strategy of hands are to the wall. The better strategy is to actually understand these steps of glycolysis, understand what your beginning products are and your goal. I know that's a lot of memorization, but you're going to have to actually have a feeling for why it needs to go here. If you understand the full process, where's that phosphate group going? What's the phosphate group even for? How many do you need? Where's it going? That's what actually triggers your memory and helps you understand. In addition, if you just went with, I have a vague memory of this process in my head, you're going to get this, you're going to have a 25% chance, because all of these things are going to be muddled in your head. Fructose 1,6-bisphosphate, glucose 6-phosphate, fructose. All of these are somewhere in that diagram and image. So if you don't have an actual understanding of it, not just a general memorization of 1 or 2 graphs, all of these are going to be trigger words, and all of them are going to feel equally correct. So you have to actually feel it. You can't just glance at graphs over and over. You have to take this kind of problem and get it wrong a few times until you say, all right, I for sure know where hexokinase is. I know what step it's doing. Because otherwise, just looking at graphs, you're going to have all these words jumbled in your head. and I'm just now reading some of the other ones. But yeah, Lois, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think these are one of the synthetic pathways that I think is like a must have. And what I did to memorize them was I just drew them out. I drew out the structure. I wrote the names under them. I put the arrows where things were coming and going. And to really cement it for me, again, I'm a visual learner. The drawings were great, but I remember, I think there's like a deck of cards in Anki that either links you to Sketchy or links you to Picturize or some image learning mnemonic device where you can just watch someone in the kitchen cooking this up. And again, it helps you remember and visualize what the structure looks like and what the next steps are. Yeah, I think but this is one of the key ones that I would take time drawing out and memorizing. 1 second.
Okay, cool. Thanks a lot. So we've reached the end of the questions. Just want to take a second. Sorry, Lois, if you don't mind, stop sharing your screen, just so I can bring mine back to the front.
Oh, yes. So sorry about that.
Oh, no worries, not at all. Okay. I don't know why mine isn't showing big. 1 second. Let me see if I can do this again. Please hold, everybody.
Oh, someone asked which Anki deck. That's a good question. I would just Google Anki and just look for like the gluconeogenesis decks, and they're on there. There are pictures with it too.
Cool. Thanks for answering that, Lois. So before we go ahead and jump into our Q&A section, just want to take the time to let you guys know that we really do value your feedback. So if you really liked this webinar, or if you think there's a couple of ways that we could improve the webinar, we would love to hear it. We're always looking for suggestions. So feel free to scan that QR code and give us your feedback. And of course, we welcome everything. So please feel free. Okay, and so now that we've reached our Q&A section, of course, you'll see the QR code there to book a free consultation. If we run out of time and your question still hasn't been answered, it's the perfect opportunity to get your question answered, as if you book a consultation with one of our panelists. But for everybody that has a question, we'll just ask that you write them in the chat. I think I saw a couple of questions earlier in the chat. If you did have a question, I know there's like a lot of activity in the chat right now, so it might be hard to find it. So if you do have a question that went unanswered and you typed it in earlier, feel free to just type it in again and we'll go ahead and answer. But I see some coming in right now. I think there's one from JT. I know everything is high yield, but obviously some topics pop up more than others. Is there a reliable resource to get those topics?
Yes, for sure. On the AAMC website, they actually give you a distribution of what content is going to be covered. And then they also put a percentage for which ones, for how frequently, and things like that. So I would go there first. But a lot of the resources that you purchase, the third-party ones, also condense their study materials so that they only really give you the high-yield material if you have a short amount of time. So like Kaplan, for example, does that, and their books are pretty thin. So they really focus on the high-yield material as well.
Okay, question from Raj. What is the best resource for content review?
You know, everyone that I knew ended up using something a little bit different. Personally, I used the Princeton Review. I just had an older cousin who took the MCAT before me and inherited a bunch of textbooks effectively. And I spent a bit of time in the semester leading up to the winter where I took the MCAT reading through those. So that by the time winter break came around, I was doing more questions than content review. I like the Princeton Review. You know, I think there's a number of sources you can go to, and based on if you have friends that have taken the MCAT that can give you a book, I don't think you always need the fanciest, brightest, newest one. If that's out of your financial budget right now, it certainly was for me. But if you need an example, I thought Princeton Review was fine.
Yeah. I used Kaplan because it had a lot of visuals that I really appreciated, but I also find that students will use varying tools depending on how well they've covered certain topics in school versus not, and then how far they are from like their pre-med journey. Like if they've just if they've been like 2-3 years out of school and just really need to like start over from start fresh. I think I also sometimes recommend Princeton Review, but if you're like just took all those classes last semester, then Kaplan can be like a really good condensed resource.
Nadia, to your question, when I took the MCAT back in 2021, we were given a whiteboard with like a dry erase marker that you could fill out, and then you raised your hand, they erased it, that kind of thing. I believe that is still the process. Lois, have you heard anything differently?
Yeah, I think it's the same. You get like, Nadia had asked, like, what do you get, paper and pencil? And I think in most sites you get like a laminated paper and then a Sharpie or like a erasable marker.
Sej is asking about Anki Deck. Sej, for full context, I didn't use Anki until I got to medical school. I do like it. What I will say though, for the MCAT, because there's so much content, you can try to have an Anki deck for all your content review. Frankly, if I were to do it again, what I would do instead is actually choose individual smaller Anki decks based on things I'm struggling with. For example, if you are just not able to get glycolysis down, that's totally fine. There's probably some Anki decks out there that are only, 15 to 25 cards. Add that to your Anki instead of trying to find some like 20,000 card deck. It's just overwhelming. It's going to take a lot of time. And while that type of spaced review and repetition is good, I think it's more useful to find out what you're struggling with and find smaller Anki decks for those. That's what I do now in medical school. I don't have like a 3-year Anki deck. I just keep a few that I know are topics I struggle with, whether it's antivirals or a particular disease or a particular body system.
Yeah, I was even I had like a little comment that I was going to post in there because I was like, I brought up Anki and I shouldn't have, because sometimes people get more bogged down in the Anki and in the deck than in like the actual process of learning. Not everybody benefits from spaced repetition, and sometimes that spaced repetition isn't even helpful if you don't know the basis in which those cards are founded from. So again, reading the material, watching videos that help before you even jump to Anki is actually sometimes what I recommend for some people.
Adasa is asking, how do you remember the physics equations?
Oh, I write those down.
Yeah, that's a great question. Like Lois said, I knew some people who the strat was like at the beginning, just write a bunch of them down and be ready to use them. That's great if you can do that. For me, I had to struggle a lot with questions and get a lot of them wrong because I just didn't know the equation. And not let yourself look it up. Just accept that you don't know it, so that you can feel a little bit of that, like, oh, I need to learn this. But two, and more importantly, is actually understanding each variable. Again, the point of knowledge is not just to have these random letters and numbers. It's to actually get a feeling, what does little a mean? What actually is acceleration, right? What actually is velocity? What is time within this context? I know that sounds really deep. But the idea is, once you can say that you understand each of those terms, the equations, despite some of them still being convoluted, do start to get a little bit easier. In particular with Physics 1, a lot of the equations build off of just a base set of maybe 8 or so equations and are just derivations of such. So if you can take just a few hours someday, or maybe it'll even take a full day to actually understand those derivations. It might take a couple of Khan Academy videos or YouTube or something, but you should be able to memorize a good amount of those equations from that. Nadia, I'll just briefly answer. You have 95 minutes for 59 questions or so. So maybe 1.6 minutes per question, but like we talked about earlier, if something is taking way too long, don't let that ruin the next few questions. Just move on. And if you have an easier one, you may be able to, in your head, eliminate A through D, because you just know, okay, A is actually primary structure, B is tertiary, C is this. Okay, the answer is E, and I've thought through this all. So I haven't just rushed through it, I've actually thought through it. It just happens to be faster for me. So, a minute to 2 minutes. The name of the website, Sarah, I'm not sure if you're referring to Inspira Advantage or another website we might have mentioned, but feel free to retype it. Studying the physics section, since each practice problem can be different. Of course, each practice problem can and will be different. Like Lois said at the beginning, you will start to notice commonalities, in particular when you start taking full lengths. You'll find practice problems that are worded very similarly. You'll find concepts that are tested high yield. And if you're missing those high yield ones, spend more time on those, not the one random question that you've never seen before and never see again. know it if you can, but really focus on the high yields that keep coming up. And again, there are breakdowns from the AAMC. Hadassah, I think that answers that question.
Margaret's asking, how can you logically dissect a question properly while having limited, I think there's a little cliffhanger there, limited time maybe? Or Margaret, if you could clarify what you mean, but if anyone wants to take a stab at that.
Yeah, I mean, Benjamin has talked about like repetition is really key, right? Because there are some questions that they will always ask, or some types of concepts that they will always ask you about. And so the first time you ever see that question, you might take some time to learn it. The second time it might be a little bit slower, but the third, the fifth, the 10th, the 20th time, you should know, right? So I think most of it will be repetition. And then of course, getting comfortable with sitting down for those lengths of time. Yeah.
Okay, Nadia's asking, what question banks would you use?
Oh, so I really like UWorld because I think it is a good learning tool. Some people don't like, I think the majority of people use it from MCAT forward to most of their like med school career. I think it's a good tool because they have really thorough explanations and very like artistic graphs that you can sort of, if you're a visual learner, that you can like anchor on. But then the closer I get to the testing day, in fact, each time I'm trying to simulate my testing environment, I try to use the AAMC's like question banks or full-length question exams, because those are the ones that are most similar to the exam. If you have more time or you're just sort of on a budget, if you already have like Kaplan exams, use the Kaplan exams. If you already have Princeton's exams, use those as well. So like, or if, for example, I have some students who sometimes are struggling with like cars sections, and then they only use Jack Weston, for example. So I think it depends on what your goal is, but the closer that you're getting to your exam date, I would recommend that you replicate the AAMC's exam as much as possible.
Okay, Zabab, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, asks, do most people take gap years before medical school and take that time to study for and take the MCAT, or do you feel it's better to take the MCAT way in advance before medical school?
Oh,
Statistically, Vaibhav, the majority of matriculants to medical school do take a gap year. In terms of what's better, I mean, it's completely up to what you're doing in your life. If you need that extra year or you want to take that extra year to pursue something, that's great. The advice I always give my friends and peers is just have something you want to do, or at least plan ahead for that something you want to do, whether it's planned or unplanned. Just make an idea of what you could be doing that's productive. Don't let it just become an amorphous length of year. So it's not better or worse. Whatever works for you is great.
yeah. Yeah, not the people that I've seen that take gap years are taking it to do other things, so not necessarily to study for the MCAT. But if you need the gap year or a couple months to like to study in a dedicated manner, then definitely take it. As Benjamin said, it's person dependent for sure.
Question from Nadia. When should you do your first practice test? My test is in 5 months and 3 weeks.
Nadia Omaimia, I'm actually typing out some answers so that we can try to hit as many of these as possible in the next few minutes. So those two, I've answered that one below, and I answered the note-taking one below as well. Margaret, I'll answer yours. No, it's not bad. Many people do much better. I happened to take it just once, but back in high school, I took the SAT twice and did much better on the second one. I have many friends that took the MCAT 2 or 3 times and did better each time. Most schools, from what I understand, will just see the highest score. I do hear that some schools can see all your attempts, and at that point, it is ideal to continually progress up. If you happen to have one that dips down, you know, it's not the best, but if you can take a third one that raises it back up, that shows improvement.
Yeah, my school looks at all the attempts, but again, it's better. We appreciate that it's trending up the score.
Nadia, I kind of went full monk mode when I did mine, and I would wake up, exercise in the morning pretty early, study throughout the morning, lunch, study throughout the afternoon, exercise, and then maybe do a little bit of light reading. A lot of it was personal reading, actually, just to kind of keep my brain warm for the car section. So I don't want to give you an exact amount of hours. What I do want to say is just make sure you're sleeping and taking time to exercise and eat as well. Neela, I typed out the answer to yours. And Lois, as I kind of go through these, if you have any that you want to type out, feel free. And if anybody has questions, just book a free consultation. Please reach out to us. As I'm reading through these, I'll even type my email on here.
I can just verbally answer it. One of Loretta's questions was about like getting through all the MCAT books. I completely identify with you. I learned in that space. I'm actually someone who appreciates visuals and videos. So I used a lot of Khan Academy and like other visual places to get my content. And I would just like go through the books to make sure I covered that chapter in some form or some way. But you're right. Like I wasn't a big like sit down and read because it would just take me so much time. So yeah, you might switch to videos. If it works for you, that's what I did as well. Video learning was like the best.
A couple more we'll hit on, and I just dropped my email, so feel free to reach back out to us. Ara, there's a ton of great videos. If you're referring to functional groups, like, I don't know if you mean amino acids or maybe some of your main like nitrates and amine groups and all that, there's a ton of great YouTube videos. I don't have any one particular one, but if you look it up, a lot of good teachers have made mnemonics and videos for that.
I'm going to quickly verbally answer two questions. One was someone had asked if there's a GPA cutoff for applications. No, there isn't for HMS. We look at people holistically. And then another question was about balancing school and studying for the MCAT. I think it depends on the person. If you're able to like study and grind school plus MCAT for like a month or a couple months, that's kind of the person that I was. And I was able to take the MCAT while I was still in school in my junior year, but it was like a hectic time that I would never put on my worst enemy. However, there's some people who do take extra time off or whittle down their class schedule so that's a little bit lighter so that they can study. I always think about MCAT prep as like another class. So if you can really only handle a four class course load, then maybe you do 3 and then you had MCAT prep on it if you're trying to do it at the exact same time.
Okay, Benji, I know you're answering questions in the chat, but I'm curious, are there any other questions that haven't been answered? I'm kind of losing track, so.
I think I'm getting through most of them. Lois was just touching on balancing school. That was the one at the bottom there. Yeah, I think that either I've typed out an answer or we've said it verbally, but once again, I apologize if I skipped over or missed it by any chance, or if you want a more elaborate answer or some time to talk, please either book a free consultation. We're happy to chat with y'all, or I've already put my email and I'm more than happy to, correspond over there. So whatever is easiest for y'all.
Jolie asked, how do you know what GPA is competitive? We're kind of like moving away from MCAT stuff, but I can talk about this really quickly. There's a tool called the MSAR, which allows you to look at schools, at least MD schools, GPAs, median GPAs, and median MCAT scores. I think it's helpful to look at it with like, for example, an Inspira counselor to sort of break down the schools that you're interested in and which ones you should apply to. So it's helpful. I use it with my students. Yeah. Oh, yes. The MSAR is free if you have a fee assistance program, and they also give you textbooks. But otherwise, I think it's about like $18 or $20 something.
Okay. Thanks so much for answering all the questions, Lois and Benji. Unfortunately, we have to wrap it up there. But if you do have a question or if maybe one comes up, feel free to book a free consultation with our advisors, or Benji left his email there if you want to maybe send him an email or book some time with him as well, or with Lois. I want to thank you all again for joining us. I know it was a really insightful conversation. I learned a lot. I'm sure you all did too. Like I said, I know it kind of got missed in the chat, but I will flag again that this webinar is going to be sent out to all attendees. So if you want to go back and review, feel free to do that. We'll be sending it out tomorrow morning. Thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you at the next webinar. Take care. Bye, everyone.